Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Sophia Arend, and I'm the Global Blockchain Business Council's Communications and Content Lead. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to the Global Blockchain Business Council and Global Digital Finance's Global Leaders Series. This is a weekly town hall we host with policymakers and business leaders to hear insights into their work, the state of the blockchain and digital asset industry, and current global affairs. And today we have the pleasure to be joined by Joe Roets, founder and CEO of Dragonchain, for a conversation on Dragonchain's blockchain, what makes their blockchain unique, and his journey as a technologist in the blockchain space. Just briefly before we begin, I'd like to introduce Joe. Joe has over 20 years of experience in software architecture, focusing on security and scalability. He has created and led multiple technology startups since the mid-1990s and is a visionary and thought leader in blockchain technology, having led or contributed to projects in the space since 2010 at companies such as Overstock, Coinbase, Symbiont, and the Walt Disney Company. We're so pleased to have Joe here with us today, and we welcome your questions at any point during today's conversation. You can submit them in the chat box on YouTube, and we will share them with Sandra and take them throughout. Thank you, Joe, for joining us, and I'll now hand things over to Sandra to begin.
Great. Thank you, Sophia, and just delighted to have Joe here with us today. It is not every day that we get to spend the next hour with Joe talking about Dragonchain. So to kick us off, Joe, love for the audience who may not be as familiar with your journey as a technologist, but also Dragonchain itself. Could you just walk us through some of the basics to start off?
Sure. So I'm primarily a software guy, and I really got into software architecture back in the 90s. And so as the intro described, I focused on security and scaling and things like that for bigger systems. And when blockchain came out, and or I should say when it was brought to me in 2010, it was already almost 2 years old at that time. It was really interesting because it was a different way to look at how you do a few different things in software, and I was very interested in it for a number of reasons, but in different ways to handle what I was already doing. And that, I immediately started looking at how to apply this to general business, to real business, not just currencies, not just peer-to-peer. And that was obviously very interesting. Obviously, the philosophy behind it mirrored a lot of what has gone on in the open source world forever. But it was, kind of putting money where your mouth was, literally, and to say this power can be used in all these different ways was a little, especially back then. It was. I'm glad we started, but it was very early. So we did a lot of, we built a lot of things that were silly or didn't end up becoming products or anything. But it was primarily trying to figure out how to scale, how to secure, how to do things that a real business would want to do with this tech, and that's what everything was about. And that went on for years before I got into Disney, which is the Dragonchain history starts there, but it's all about those things. So anyway, that's high level.
Yeah, no, in many ways, let's face it, technology does follow a trial and error path for quite a while before it gets to a place where it's really there. The crossover can happen where enterprises can adopt and actually use it at scale. Right. So you mentioned Dragonchain started at Disney. Could you elaborate a little bit about sort of how you ended up there and how this got incubated, and then how long was the journey? How long did it take for it to, and then why spin off?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I was looking at all of these problems, and I was thinking as an architect at a high level, what needs to be done, what needs to be built in order to actually leverage this technology for these various real industries, right?
Right.
And in that process, I went to a number of startups, just as a, as a technologist, as a software architect. And they were always, it's the nature of the beast. They were always very limited in scope because they're startups, right? So, they're focusing on one problem, one tiny problem. And I'm trying to understand and get to a place where I can really try out some of these things that I've learned, right, in the years since 2010, and they were all too focused on niche issues. And so when Disney called up and offered a position in Seattle, it was a prime opportunity because Disney has every use case under the sun, having physical parks and having obvious, how would I say, various types of digital assets, right?
Sure. Sure.
And they have banks, they have everything, and so it was a great place to go and start building a platform that we could, throw up against the rocks. So we could say, let's really try to build this and see what breaks. And, so I went there in 2014. And so it took, we were in W3C. So we were talking with a lot of the bigger companies that were in the blockchain space in that time period, that IBM, Microsoft,
right.
R3, some of the banks. And, we were building something that was very fundamentally different, and it was built from scratch. It wasn't a fork, and we considered to fork a couple of different blockchains, but we decided what we were building was sufficiently different that it would have been it's just more efficient to start from scratch. So, right. We were doing that, and we built for a few years there and built out a lot of different use cases. We got a lot of attention from a lot of those other players, especially the W3C side of things, because we were able to employ the engineers we already had. We didn't need to hire in blockchain engineers. We didn't need there were a lot of interesting things that, because of our approach, which is fundamentally, it was a very philosophical approach, but it was all about the architecture, all about the goals. We weren't worried about the politics or, which tech we should use and which we shouldn't.
Right.
It was very much about, and we can go into the goals later, but the things that mattered to business came first. And we were able to solve things that the other projects weren't able to. And so we realized, and yet I couldn't tell them how because it was all proprietary. So we convinced the, Disney itself. They had an open source committee, and we convinced them to, at least let us go through the process to get approval to open source the platform.
Wow, that's really cool. I did not realize that Disney had an open source committee of sorts.
Oh yeah,
awesome.
Yeah, they've open sourced a lot of stuff. I think the big, like Pixar, has some standards that they've open sourced.
Cool.
I'm trying to remember what other groups. There were a lot of projects that they've run through there, and it's a very comprehensive process. You have to get legal. You have to get I can't even remember all the checkpoints, but
right.
Multiple business units, multiple legal. Legal units. I don't know what how they're separated, but we had to get approval from parks. We had to get approval from corporate. We had to get approval from the trademark and patent groups inside of Disney, on top of all of the regular general software checks. So
yeah.
And so we then about 2 years later, probably a little more than 2 years, we released Dragonchain. It was formerly the Disney private blockchain platform, and we couldn't use we couldn't use any names or anything trademarked. So I had to come up with a name, Dragonchain, and so we released that in October of 2016.
Amazing. Still very, very early on.
Yeah.
Back 2016. And then once you released it, what was some of the reaction internally versus externally, if you recall?
Internally, it was a success. I mean, there were politics. There are always politics.
Sure.
But it was, it was seen as a success. It went out. We got a lot of attention, even without a press release, without any, which there was good and bad to that, because people on the outside, it was just crazy speculation, And I say crazy, a lot of it was reasonable, but the ones that we remembered were, calling out that people are going to be able to use Bitcoin at the parks and stuff like that. And,
right.
But Disney chose to not put out a press release, so we couldn't really, say much. But we went through all that, and, the reaction on the outside was, excitement and, why was Disney using this? Because a lot of people, especially back then, but even now, I guess, were focused on the purely speculative number go up side of the industry, right? And so when Disney comes out, it's like, why is Disney doing this? Why are they in this? And it wasn't about the thing that half of the world, or more than half of the world, was talking about with blockchain at the time or now. So there's still a lot of people that don't get it, but it's all about business. So,
well, so we're here today really to, you've got a very significant, I'm not going to call it a fan base, but a group of, followers and community that are understand Dragonchain. But for those who may not, and actually one of the first questions that have actually come through is what we're going to talk about next, is really, you've explained that you built this from ground up. It's not a fork. It's not, code from other blockchains like many of the other ones are. What makes Dragonchain unique and distinctive versus some of the other blockchains that are out there? We're not saying better. You guys can say better, but what we're trying to say here is, what are the differences so that people are aware? Right.
Okay. We are fundamentally a hybrid blockchain, but we're not just a hybrid blockchain because it's a cool thing or a hot thing to say. From the beginning, the answer to most of my questions as an architect for how do we scale this technology, we're very focused on separating. That's what you do with software architecture. You separate the functionality into fundamental units that make things more flexible, that can help you break down where certain changes can be held, right? And it's kind of an abstract, boring thing about architecture, but the effect is amazing because being a hybrid blockchain allows us to separate the proof from the business logic and the proof from the business state, or that data, which could be privacy data, could be HIPAA data, could be financial data, anything that might be sensitive information, proprietary. And so our biggest focus, the top goal when we founded the project at Disney was protection of business data, right? Because fundamentally, if I'm a bank, I have to protect my data. I can't put it out. I don't care what the maximalists on crypto Twitter say. I'm not going to put my customer data on Ethereum public net. I'm not even going to encrypt it there because that's not safe. The second was scalability, right? And the third was flexibility, right? And all of these things came together, because we had other goals, like say ease of use, things like that, so that developers, but they all worked together. None of them opposed each other. It was a very interesting thing because, we could go into the depths of how the architecture actually worked, but it's a multi-level, multi-context verification. So if you have a business, you can look at a piece of data And even though no one in the world has ever seen that data except for you, because it's your data, you could prove to anyone that you need to prove it to that transaction or set of transactions came in, last March or whatever, and that because we've employed in a hybrid system the network power and hash power of Bitcoin and Ethereum and other blockchains, you have actual measurable proof, which is the unique thing about blockchain in the end. The fundamental primary difference about blockchain tech is not that it's chained. It is literally that with that chain and with the type of proof provided within the block, you can actually measure the likelihood of whether I'm lying to you when I show you data, right?
Right.
And Bitcoin uses that to avoid double spend, to control a currency. But it's an interesting concept because that gives us what we call measurable proof, right? So all those things together give us a lot of different, points in the flexibility equation, that we can plug into other blockchains, we can plug into other traditional systems, and it's all to a developer it's just second nature. It's not like learning a new technology. It's because developers become I've been a developer forever, right? So it's a very personal thing what language you're using, and sometimes it's religious, right? And that we wanted a company, and inside of Disney, it was very much that if we would be talking to another business unit, their developers would be a prime part of the conversation, and they would have to be comfortable not only with I have to integrate it with things that already exist, things that are already here, right?
Right.
That becomes extremely simple because we have a RESTful interface, we have SDKs. It's something. I can pick it up. I can write this in Python. Oh, sure, I can write this in Java. Sure, any language. And beyond that, it's also a question of, then you talk to the DevOps guys. So if you're going to deploy a real system and it's a corporation and they've never touched blockchain, we had quite a hurdle when we convinced the brass to let us run a Bitcoin node, right? So you imagine, and that was not any Disney going on there at all at the time. We got that support, and when everybody realizes, including the DevOps and security people, that it's an organic solution, it allows them to use the patterns and best practices they already know, right? There's nothing special about it. It's just software.
Yeah.
So everything fit into that, and it is every single business node. Another unique element, every single business node and every single verification node on our entire network has its own blockchain. So it is literally a blockchain of blockchains that all communicate with each other, and they all have different functions. Either some of them have business functions, literally, others have verification. One of them might be a validation node, one of them might be a notary. So I could go on for hours. It's very different. So.
Yeah, no, it's like a federation of blockchains within the network. Joe, can I ask one question to you that's more technical? Could you turn off your video and turn it back on? It seems to have frozen, and
yes,
a few folks have asked if possibly you could see if that works.
Better. There.
Hopefully you'll be back. Oh, there you are. Great.
Okay. Yeah, you keep freezing on my side too, so. It's probably
we'll have to live with that. Yeah, no, it's unfortunate that we got a little bit of technical difficulty, but more importantly, you've highlighted the hybrid blockchain nature of Dragonchain. What use cases? Let's move to like applications and some of the use cases that excite you, and really kind of why you built this, right? And why you and the team built this. Let's talk about that. Are there a couple use cases you want to kind of bring forth?
Sure. We have something that we call proof systems. So if you think about it generically, and I think the most fundamental difference between what we do and what other blockchains do, which is sometimes confusing, and sometimes we get trolled about the fact that it's hybrid. It's not purely centralized. I'm like, yes, that's the point of it, right? Because not all data will ever be purely decentralized. You never put your social security number and your bank account publicly on a blockchain, right? That's private. Are you a horrible person? No. So proof systems are important because you can hold your cards to chest. You can hold your private info. You can hold your business logic, and only when it matters. When a regulator comes in, when a customer comes in, or when a partner, a business partner comes in, you can show them, here's what really happened, and there's no way for me to fake this, right? With not given billions of dollars, say, right? And so it's something that people can understand. That's a huge piece, and I think that's one that generically applies to almost everything else. Not entirely, but almost every system that we have.
Yeah.
Now, probably we have loyalty, we have compliance. It makes total sense, right? Archival. We have a system that can save tweets on the blockchain with proof. So when the person, politician or somebody deletes them, or when a politician is banned, they're still there. So it's an interesting thing. We have some financial systems, and we actually productize some pieces there that we're rolling out right now to provide transparency, controlled transparency, things like that. And identity is another big one, where we spun off a project that we had started in 2018 to primarily do device identity, but it's now being applied to human identity with multi-factor in a controlled, decentralized way. So, that basically the user could hold their own identity data and provide it with third-party proof that, yes, this really is my name. Yes, it really is my age, or even that I'm of age, right? Just that literally I have a derived factor that I'm over 18.
Right.
You can trust because some third party did look at my passport or whatever else. And we have we even launched a social network to basically demonstrate what can be done, right, in a way that doesn't at all feel. A lot of people don't even know that it's running entirely on blockchain, right? So because it's a very fluid environment, it feels like you're in a different social platform. So anyway, there's probably a good list. There's more, of course, but
Sure. But delving a little bit into one of the questions that's come through about when you mentioned it's a hybrid blockchain, the person's asking a bit more about customer data and scalability. So does it mean that the customer data sits within one of the blockchains of blockchains, and that's part of the sort of distributed nature of Dragonchain? If you could talk a little bit more about customer data, I think that would be helpful.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So basically, if you're running a business node on Dragonchain, you can either run in what we would call the managed service, where we're handling the node and scaling everything, or you can run your own node in your own data center or wherever your cloud environment is. So wherever that is, and you could run, one, or we have a lot of customers that run multiple nodes to separate their own data. Mm-hmm. But that data lives on that node, on that blockchain, on your own blockchain. Before blocks are sent up for verification from that business node, the payload section in every transaction is stripped. So that's where the primary sensitive data is. And so it never moves off of your node unless you explicitly do that, right? That there are ways and there are reasons that you might have a partner that you automatically give a feed of a certain subset of transactions. So now and we have a few interesting architectural models where you can do, what is usually categorized as edge computing, where you basically push the data as far as you can close to the customer for efficiency and so on. And we give some very interesting capabilities around that, because you can measure data quality on that IoT device. You can check that this is not corrupt data, and I'm holding it, and I don't have to go back and ask. And you even have some interesting angles for time management, that if you're out of sync or anything else, because it's a blockchain. So that's one, but there's how do I say, it's all in your control. And we do have some as well for disaster recovery, which makes sense as well, that I can break up where my data lives, but that's all up to the customer, right? And so the rest of it's interesting, because the rest of the network that does the verification operates from different contexts. That we have one class of node that just does validation, and so it takes metadata and it validates that your signatures are proper and everything's sound. Then we have another that checks that those validations come from disparate sources. And then we have another that is a pure notary. It doesn't care about anything. It just signs the block. And then we have the ones that are concerned with what we would call either checkpoints or foreign blockchains, which is, in our case right now, Bitcoin, Ethereum Classic.
Oh, okay.
And these nodes aggregate other blocks into those networks, so that in the end, every single transaction on your business node gets very fast decentralization inside of DragonNet. But then within time, within 10, 15, 30, or an hour, you will get security, that we apply Bitcoin and Ethereum security to every single transaction. So it's an interesting way to do it, but it works because they're all individually scalable. They're their own units. So it doesn't matter if one part of the network goes down.
Yeah, no, and that's incredibly important when you're running large enterprise systems. And I think, I just want to underscore here some of the things that you've said around, enterprise challenges, which unless you work at a big enterprise, it's kind of hard to understand. But the importance of, reliability, coexisting with existing systems, whether that's software or hardware, it's both, the infrastructure, the talent to be able to develop on top of whatever it is, or develop what you're developing. That race for talent is also important, having the talent pool. And then the scalability, the flexibility that you mentioned, critically important. And then let's not forget the security aspect of all of this. How many millions of dollars, billions of dollars are enterprises spending on shoring up their security, right? And you've seen this happen over the last number of decades. And let's face it probably won't end in terms of the vulnerability. So we're going to talk a little bit more about security in a second, but I would love if you could talk a little bit about the scalability portion. You've talked a bit more about it, but on Dragonchain, there was a 24-hour demo you ran that you demonstrated capacity versus, for example, the likes of a Visa. Can you talk a little bit about that, because that's pretty cool?
Right. It was funny because we had our sales team. They were going to do a webinar or something, and we got into it and said, what if we turned on the system with at least demonstration, so people could, because people have to see to believe that you could tell them till you're blue in the face, it doesn't matter unless you can show it, right? Sure. And so in the end, I proposed, what if we did this during the webinar? And then that turned into, why do we have a webinar? Why don't we just have a 24-hour live stream where we have, and it was hard to get enough content, and it was hard to stay awake, right? But we did it, and our goal was basically to maintain. And I can't remember all the numbers in all truth, but because it was about a year ago. But the goal was to maintain at least a 50% over what the worldwide Visa payment network does. Not at peak or anything, but over, because that was the thing that most other blockchains, when they were doing something and showing, okay, we got this many transactions per second, everyone would come in and say, you did it for 3 seconds. What's that matter? And we thought, okay, well, a real system, you have to be able to have the endurance to run it that long and to show no failings. We didn't have a single transaction fail. It was a very successful test. I can't remember what the peak was. It was like 15,000 transactions per second or something, but we didn't, that wasn't the goal. We just did that at the end just to see what the system could do that we set up. Because and in fact, it was funny because the network itself was not even the bottleneck. That the business nodes, scaling those, and they were all running on AWS, right? So scaling those was the hard, and scaling the data, right? Basically faking that amount of data over that period of time was the part that was the biggest difficulty. But it ran, I think we did 260 something million transactions that day over 24 hours. And the interesting part, the part that we didn't even expect to highlight, was that we did 5 or 6 orders of magnitude increase in traffic that one day, right, compared to the days before or after. And we didn't have, and it was on the operational network, so it was on the network that all the other businesses were using, including our own systems. That we didn't have any network congestion at all. None of the systems fell over, and no one's fees went up, which that was the other side of it. Yeah, and that's something that's maybe a little abstract, but it's the way that we track scarcity inside of our ecosystem is time-based instead of hardware-based. So it's not affected by something like that. It's not affected by, a massive spike in traffic. Yeah. So it's interesting.
I think that's actually a really key point, is some of the challenges that other blockchains are having right now is all of a sudden a bunch of people pile in, or a bunch of transactions get pushed through, and then the fees just go to, ridiculous levels, uneconomical levels, let's put it that way. And the very fact that you did that for 24 hours and pushed the system, and it still didn't increase fees, is pretty amazing.
Yeah, we thought so. I mean, everything worked, right? And I should say too, we've run at least a few days over 1 million transactions a day since then in operations that weren't demos. They were just live customer data. And we expect a few of the systems that we have running now to have some pretty massive increases in transaction volume. We don't know when, right? It's all business. So, but but from what we know coming, that there should be a lot of transactions coming up. So,
well, it's good that you guys have a certain degree of high confidence that systems are good. I really, I'd love for you, if you are comfortable now, to pivot to talking about Dragonchain's digital fortress. Recently, I've been enamored because I read the article and some of the written work around this. Can you please talk about why this is important for businesses and organizations? First of all, what is it, and why is it important?
Okay. Fundamentally, it's a combination of our tech, and we have a couple of partners that we've rolled in Cloudface and Aquid, and there's some others that have some very interesting proprietary quantum resistant algorithms, right? They have some patents, they have some other things. It was kind of, in fact, I don't even know if I could really reiterate how exactly we all came together, but it's, you know, it makes total sense when you consider what we've done and what they've done, that our goal has been to fundamentally integrate that quantum safe tech, those algorithms, with our blockchain, because at some point now you have, and there'll be a lot of different how do I say, options in this product, you know, suite that we're rolling out, but it's basically that you can have at rest quantum safe encryption, and you can have all of our verifications tied also to that quantum safe encryption that will have the quantum safe signatures at least one verification node and within the business node if you have these options turned on, which, you know, it's a very enterprise thing, but it's I would say for the most extreme, it's very important for the most extreme situations in the world where, you know, either well, I don't want to say even government applications or you know, highly sensitive data. So that'll be available, and it's all about options, in my opinion. That you can integrate it in a way that makes sense for your security team, and in ways that we don't. This is it's an interesting thing about software architecture, because if you design something well, things will happen that you don't anticipate, right? And this is one of them that, you know, we didn't expect this tech to be valuable in the way that it is to the organizations that are interested in this new tech. So it's basically that. I mean, it's just all about a fundamental focus on high security, but tied to flexibility. So it's, you know, and that's part of it. You can't have a secure system that's brittle, right? Because it'll break. There are too many points that somebody can break it. So, yeah.
I think, well, actually, I'll pose a question to you off the back of what you just said. Question I often hear, many a conference or panel or whatever, is around quantum computing and, you know, encryption being broken as it is today. What happens to blockchains? Do they all break? And I think, you know, you and your partners are addressing that. But you made an excellent point, which I don't think most people are focusing on, which is there is a spectrum of data in terms of what you really, really, really want to secure at the highest levels versus data that's just, let's face it, I mean, doesn't mean very much, even on a good day. Not that you don't protect it, but it doesn't require the same level of protection. And would love to get your view on whether you think enough companies, especially blockchain companies, are now looking at filling that spectrum gap, meaning securing always, but there's different levels of securing. And I find that not a lot of discussion is being had around quantum safe or quantum resistant blockchains. Do you feel like that's coming up the curve? You guys are very unique in that way. I think you're one of the few that are really sort of addressing it and coming up with product sets and services to offer.
Right. And, you know, I know there have been a few projects that that stated that as a goal, and I don't know, you know, where they're at, right, with quantum resistant tech. And so, you know, we welcome all projects because we can interchain with all of them. So if we need to use new tech that is out there, that's another part of our flexibility goal, that if something comes out, we want the customer to be able to tap into that new tech very easily, very directly, without a year's worth of trying to figure out standards or anything, right? Something you can do this week. And how do I say, you bring up an interesting point, because in that, we tend to consider the mundane data to be very important. That is, the little things that the customer does in advance of a certain action that you now 3 or 6 months later care about, right? That you can tell a lot about whether that person is a bot really, or whether they're trying to, find holes in the system before they attack, things like that. On top of the fact, if you're a business and, a regulator comes after you, or you get sued or something else, having all of that data helps you in so many ways, and having it in a way that is measurably provable, that there's no way that someone on the inside could have fraudulently changed the data, right? That I can look at it and know, okay, this is as it was. This is when it happened, and with $300 million worth of proof attached, right? So, did anyone on my staff spend $300 million and attack all the network and Bitcoin? And no, they didn't, right? So I can know that it's reasonable. And then we're seeing about the daily moves up and down quite a bit, but we're seeing about $4 billion worth of proof applied every year to every single transaction on DragonNet.
Okay.
And the longer it is, the more power has been applied to it. But we have all that, and we actually do consider it to be inside of our network, to be a spectrum of trust that, and it's a very important thing to consider, because you could take it from the point of view of trust and value, versus how do I say, consistency, if you're a data person, right? So on the trust side, your business node, you fully trust it, right? So someone else might not, because they're not you, but you own it, you control it. If you're a developer, you built it. So anything that's validated there, barring a bug or something, okay, this was a valid transaction, it went in, and something happened, right? Now, the nodes above you, which for verification, we're talking, like I did before, about validation, diversity of the nodes, notary, and then proof, that they are an ever increasing amount of, although not pure, you can't measure it, but it is a decentralization that is extremely fast and very, very, very cheap, that for every transaction, let's say I get a login, and the log was an administrative login happened, right?
Okay.
So somebody's attacking your system, that immediately that's spread out. So unlike traditional best practices where they would have to find the node that you're sending your logs to and then they attack it, this one occurs. These are all nodes on different networks. They're spread around the world, and you're going to have 6 or 7 and then 14 within seconds, right? So that's hard to counter. And then on top of it, we are applying as much hash power or network power as we can with Ethereum and Bitcoin and others. And once you get to that point, then you're talking, there's a cost, an actual dollar cost to me attacking that network.
Right.
And even if you go beyond that, like say if you're, let's say, a military operation or something, and you want to know that this data is not compromised, did someone break into the system and replace the data that I'm looking at, where let's say I'm about to 3D print, some part for a vessel or something,
right.
That not only can I look, okay, well, there's $3 billion worth of hash power applied since this, but somebody could decide to spend $3 billion to attack this particular data, that I can also look to see if there were any simultaneous forks on those public networks, which that's never happened, but that's something that the world would know about before I even cared to look at it, right? So you would know there's these forks, so we need to pay attention to whether this data is sound, right? So it's very much a spectrum, But on the other side of things, if you're a data person, it's a spectrum of consistency. That is, at your node, you have immediate consistency. You don't have to wait for the other blockchains to finish their verifications. You don't have to, because you trust your own node. Now, if you're using someone else's data from Dragonchain, it's an interesting thing, because you could say, I got in a transaction for a real estate purchase of $10 million. And I can now wait until I have enough measurable proof to surpass that, by maybe 10x before I accept that transaction. It's an interesting concept, but you have an economy, or at least an economic measure of the trust itself. So that makes sense.
Yeah, no. I mean, look, I think this is where whether you're a data person or whether you are a business person, I think people have different viewpoints on how data should be secured. But the very fact that you guys are offering services with your partners on that, what I consider most sensitive end of the spectrum data, and have the potential to secure that in a way that is just, unprecedented in many ways. There are plenty of white papers, I agree with you, but there are very few that I've seen actual services, products, applications that can actually run in the near future. And you guys are one of them. So I think it's pretty significant. And I wouldn't be surprised if every government, especially Department of Defenses, are knocking down your door to answer that. We're going to move on to, in the last few minutes, you've got a bunch of questions, which I've been peppering them in, so most of them have been answered. But I do want to ask you a little bit of a 2021 outlook. It's been crazy couple years. Not that the previous years weren't insane, but it has been challenging. What is up for Dragonchain in 2021? What are you going to focus on besides, making sure that the network continues to evolve and be the best that it can be? What are some of the other goals that you guys have for Dragonchain?
I would say almost entirely, most of our energy is focused on adoption. So, we have greatly expanded the sales staff. We've greatly expanded the network that the sales staff, we've joined GBBC as a part of that, because now is the point where we're reaching out and really showing people what can be done, and hopefully reintroducing some of the concepts, because some of them have been whittled down to things that shouldn't have been the focus in the crypto world. And that's because of these speculators and the things that happen. And there's good and bad, because that does drive interest sometimes. So I don't ever mind when Bitcoin goes through the roof, right? That's a good thing. But we're addressing that, and we've learned, I will say probably the biggest challenge we've had wasn't the technology. That was huge. I mean, it was really hard. In fact, it's hard. I will tell you, it is hard as a developer to convince developers to look at things a different way, right? And so we've done a lot of that, and our team's amazing. But our biggest challenge, in my opinion, has been communication, because it's one of our community once said, we're not selling hot dogs, right? I mean, this is not something that anyone has rules on how to sell. Right. Some groups have sold consulting around this, right? Which is the smart thing to do, because it's simple and it's obvious. But, we've spent a lot of time trying to explain these concepts in a way that business people can understand, not because, it's a new concept, it's because this is something you already know. This is just a different way to do that, and or a way that's maybe a little more direct to do what you already do. And, finding these things and really trying to differentiate, what is really different about us. It took us quite a while because it's still very abstract. It's hard to understand, but the fact that a blockchain doesn't have to be purely decentralized. A blockchain we can get the value doing what we're doing and separating the data from the proof, right? The proof is what's important for blockchain. The data is what's important for business. And being able to use those two things, and that's all about basically trial and error, thousands of times talking to people to figure out what really clicks, and this is the way we need to describe this, and and then you have to make it concise. Then you have to fit it into an elevator pitch or into a 30-second spot. It's hard. So,
no,
but that's
it's certainly not easy, and frankly, combining a brand new emerging technology and then translating it to what I call, old world understanding is challenging. But we are seeing a huge evolution over the last 5-6 years. And I think, you answered my other question actually, which is, are you guys hiring? You've clearly hired more folks. How do people get involved in Dragonchain? You must have a number of resources. I know you've got Twitter, I know you've got GitHub and various other. Where's the best place for someone to go?
Wow. For early, you could hit any of them. We used to focus a lot on Telegram because I think we still have 7 or 8 different communities there, not including the foreign language ones, right? That we have.
Right.
So we have communities for every language, nearly, and we welcome others. We have communities for holders, communities for traders, communities for general discussion. And, I guess I would direct people to go to the Telegram community to ask where, but we're moving everything over to Den. So it's den.social, where there's a Dragonchain layer, and you can ask any question in there, and it's all on blockchain. So it's fundamental. Plus, you get rewarded. I mean, if you ask a good question, you make money. It's interesting, right? And it's more than anything a demonstration of what you can do, right? So that's what I would probably direct them to go to den.social, sign up, and go to the Dragonchain layer, ask anything you want there. But we also have a show, we have a show in a few minutes here that we run every week. That's just live, and people can come and ask questions. We typically give a set of announcements and talk about what's coming up. So
awesome. And then if anyone is interested on building on top of Dragonchain, go direct, or you can come to us and we'll make sure it gets channeled to Joe and Trey. Final words, because I know you've got your own show coming up very soon. Last couple minutes, what advice do you have for other entrepreneurs in the space? It's been challenging in various ways for the community. As someone who's seen sort of several cycles of the way software development has worked, and now you've got blockchain and AI and a bunch of others that are converging, what advice do you have for the entrepreneurs out there who, may be struggling a bit and trying to figure out the right combination for success? Any parting thoughts?
Fundamentals. I mean, it's don't ignore the business. There are some projects that sometimes take shortcuts, and it's an understandable thing. It's startups in any technology do that, but if you can find the fundamental reasons to build something that it tends to be economic, a lot of times, and a lot of it is very much what you how do I say this? You can get a gut feeling about something. Those are worth following. But it very much is, I think a lot of people think things are impossible right now that aren't. And, we've seen some, and we've been pretty successful at showing what's possible in a few cases. And, given that alone, there's tremendous amount of opportunity out there, and there's a lot that needs to be built. So mostly I would just say to start building stuff, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, I agree with you. I think let's not forget fundamentals. Businesses need to figure out a business model, aka how will you generate revenue to pay for and grow what you want to build. but also having product, and to be able to show that is not something that should be under valued.
Right.
Especially in a world of lots of vaporware. Well, thank you,
Yes.
Joe.
Yes.
I appreciate your time and your insights. And frankly, people need to take a very good look at Dragonchain who don't already know what the latest is, because you guys are developing some pretty amazing, unique solutions for the enterprise space. And frankly, it applies to many governments as well as corporate for-profit enterprises.
Right.
And so lots of different groups should be interested around the world in your blockchain. Thank you very much. And off you go to your own webinar session or online session. But thank you very much. I'm going to hand back over to Sophia. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Joe and Sandra, just for everyone who tuned in today. Thank you for your questions and for joining us. We host these every Tuesday, so we will share the details for the next ones coming up, and we invite you to tune in as well as to GBBC's other webinars. Thanks, Joe. Thank you, Sandra, and to everyone, have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.